Give me the Bible, star of gladness gleaming, to cheer the wanderer lone and tempest-tossed. No storms can hide that radiance peaceful beaming, since Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Give me the Bible, holy message shining, thy light shall guide me in the narrow way. Precept and promise, law and love combining, till night shall vanish in eternal day.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Long with the Ruston Church of Christ. We're just thankful for you joining us for another study. We're going to be looking at Joshua chapter 22. In our Bible classes here at Ruston, we're actually going to go all the way through the end of the book. We've been studying Joshua now for the last couple of months. And we are going to conclude our book study. But for our online videos, of course, if you have been following along with us, but if you're new to us, you may not know this, we're only going to be looking at a portion of what we would normally study. So what I want to look for is something just really unique that happens in chapter 22, where there's a second altar that is built. But before we get started into that, if you would, please like and share our videos or subscribe. If you like our content, if you'd like to continue to see things like this as we try to openly and honestly study God's Word to make real-life application to Christians in the 21st century. But we're going to look at Joshua chapter 22. There's an altar of witness that happens, and an altar of witness that is built. Just to get you caught up to where we are at, Joshua just got done dividing up the land to the people, giving each nation their portion, and they have gone out and they have each received their portion. And now Joshua is about to die, and he is calling the tribes together, and that's what happens in chapters 23 and 24. But chapter 22, there are 3 tribes that go to take their portion, their inheritance, on the east side of the Jordan River. Not on the traditional Canaan side, but the Reubenites, the half-tribe of Manasseh, and the tribe of Gad. Each one of those 3 tribes receives land on the east side of the river because it was good for farmland, it was good for herding, for their herds, and they had large herds. And so they had struck an agreement with Moses and then with Joshua to help the Israelite nation as a whole conquer the land, and then they would receive that portion. And so in the first 6 verses, Joshua is giving his instructions to them, but he says something just kind of unique in chapter 5, or maybe not unique is the word. He says something that I think is just worth us taking note of. In verse 5 he says, "But take careful heed to do the commandment and the law which Moses the servant of the Lord commanded you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to keep his commandments, to hold fast to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." And you know, sometimes we can look at the Old Testament God and we can think about him in this wrathful, vengeful, cold-hearted judge, and our relationship with him is just always subservient, and it's never to have a real relationship with him other than we are these inferior beings that we think he wants nothing to do with. But in this verse 5, he says that we should cling to him, that we should hold fast to him, and to serve him with all our heart and with all our soul, to love him and to care for him because he's loved and cared for his people. And so I just really love that idea of clinging to the Lord that delivers us. And that's what they were instructed to do. So then in verses 7 and 9, they go out and they take their portions. They get their territories, they take their land. And then in chapter 10 is where the event happens that causes an almost disastrous occasion. Verse 10, it says, "And when they came to the region of the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a great, impressive altar." It says in verse 11, "Now the children of Israel heard someone say, 'Behold, the children have built an altar.'" And then in verse 12 it says that when the children of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered together at Shiloh to go to war against them. And so we see these 3 tribes. They leave Joshua, they cross the river, and immediately they build an altar. And when the Israelite people hear about it, they immediately get ready to go and to fight them. They've spent all these years fighting to clear the lands of these idolatrous people. They've been commanded over and over again not to take idols, not to worship other gods, not to serve other gods. And then the first thing they hear is that these 3 tribes that were going to go across the river immediately build an altar. And so they are ready to wipe them out. And so what ends up happening is in verses 13 through 15, Eleazar, who is now the high priest, he's the son of Aaron, and the elders, a representative of each tribe, gets together and goes to speak to the leaders of those tribes to investigate it. And what they're doing is they're following a commandment that was given to them in Deuteronomy in chapter 13. That chapter is all about what you should do when you hear about someone serving an idol or a false god. And first, it talks about what to do when whether a prophet or a seer or a dreamer says that they should follow another god, or when somebody within your house or one of your close friends, what you should do to them. And in both cases, it's kill them and kill them immediately. And then it says, whenever you hear of a city that all of the people collectively have done this, what you do is you make an investigation. That's in verses 12 and 13. Was what you should do when you find a city. And verse 14 says, you shall inquire, search out, ask diligently. And if it is indeed true and certain that such an abomination has committed among you, surely you shall strike the inhabitants of that city. And it says that you should kill everyone in the city, and that you should destroy the entire city, and that no one will ever be allowed to rebuild on the ruins of those cities. It's a serious, serious crime against God to worship idols, to put something in his place. And so we see the Israelite people taking seriously for what seems like the first time the sins of idolatry. And so they're ready to go to war, but first they're careful to investigate. They're not moving to the left hand, they're not moving to the right from God's law, as we've studied before. They are following God's law to a T on how to eradicate this sin from their nation. And they give a plea when they go to these individuals about the different instances where people within the Israelite nation have worshipped idols, and how it has caused death, and how it's caused all sorts of problems for them. They recall about an instance of the Peor, and if you remember that's with Balaam, when his donkey wouldn't go because the angel of the Lord was standing in front of him, because the king Balak was trying to curse God's people. And then they recall about Achan, who took the accursed things from Jericho and then resulted in several people dying after that. They plead to them, why would you do this? Why would you worship these false gods? And then in verse 21, they start their response. And they start off saying, if what you're saying is true, if we have truly deserted God, and if we have truly followed after idols, then you're right. We deserve to die. And in verses 26 through 28, they give their explanation. They say, therefore we said, let us now prepare to build ourselves an altar, not for burnt offering, nor for sacrifice, but that it may be a witness between you and us and our generations after us, that we may perform the service of the Lord before him with our burnt offerings, with our sacrifices, and with our peace offerings, that your descendants may not say to our descendants in time to come, you have no part in the Lord. What they're saying is, we built this altar so that it would be a reminder and a witness between both the tribes that are in the promised land on the west and to our descendants here on the east, that we are part of this nation and that we have a right to worship God. We are part of his people. We didn't build this to worship on. We didn't build this to offer sacrifices on, but as a witness, as a testimony that when our descendants get a little bit older and your descendants get older and the people that experience this conquest firsthand are gone, that when our children come, they will be accepted and everyone will know those are the children of Israel as well, is what they're pleading for. It says in verse 28, therefore we said that it will be that when they say to us or to our generation in times to come, that we may say, here is the replica of the altar of the Lord which our fathers made, though not for burnt offerings nor for sacrifices, but it is a witness between you and us. Far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord. And so they give this beautiful tale, or this beautiful statement, if you will. They said, we did this to honor God. We did not do this to try to worship incorrectly, but we wanted a guarantee that not only us but future generations would be able to be received to worship God. And then in verses 33 and 34, it says that the thing pleased the children of Israel, and the children of Israel blessed God. They spoke no more of going against them in battle. And they called the altar Witness, for it is a witness between us that the Lord is God, that Jehovah is God. And I love this story because it shows the results of having hearts that are trained towards God and then minds that follow and seek out the instruction from God. The Israelite people, if they had not sought it out carefully, if they had not investigated it like Deuteronomy 13:14 commanded them to, they may have gone in and killed all these people wrongfully. Not because they had committed any sin, but because they were trying to honor God and trying to secure worship rights for their future generations. And so when we read this story, it tells us a little bit about how we ought to go about serving God. We do it with hearts that's only focus, our only focus is to serve God, to glorify Him. And everything we do, we make sure that we do it with the authority of God, that we do it where we're not going to the left or to the right. You know, there are a lot of people that have a lot of things to say about God's commands, and a lot of people are trying to loose things that are not loosed. These individuals, when they built this altar, there was no commandment for them to be able to build an altar. There are a lot of people today that say, just if the Bible does not explicitly state it, anything you do that is not explicitly stated is a sin. And when we see this, what they did wasn't a sin because they were trying to honor God. And they didn't violate any law that stood, but they were trying to, in building this altar, secure their worship rights. They were trying to follow after God. And so we look here, an example of silence that wasn't authoritative. They had no authority. They were given no commandment to build this altar, but they did it, and it was accepted. But then there are those today that would want to swing a little bit further. And one thing that we do see here is that sacrifices and worship was only authorized at the altar that was prepared at Shiloh before the tabernacle. And these people said, "Far be it from us to do evil in the sight of the Lord and offer these sacrifices here." They built an altar that they had no authority to build, but they were building it not to circumvent God's law, not to manipulate what God had instructed them to do, but they built this altar so that they would have a reminder who it was that they worshiped and so that they could secure their rights. And I think this is a good reminder of what we ought to do as we interpret God's word. All throughout the book of Joshua, it is depart not to the left or to the right, but only stay within God's word. We need to live our lives the same way as the New Testament church. When God makes a command, we ought to follow it. But just because there is no command given doesn't mean that we get to walk out on the cliff of silence and like we're standing over solid ground and start striking down people as if everything is sin if it's not explicitly detailed and authorized in the New Testament. I know that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but it's a biblical approach. These people were not authorized to build this altar, but they were accepted. However, if they had offered sacrifices on it, that would have violated a command. They would have been found in sin. There's some lessons for us to learn. I hope we learn that when we walk, that we would do just like the tradition that we come out of was known for doing, is to speak where the Bible speaks and to be silent where the Bible is silent. That we only state things that we have clear, explicit authority for. We only do things that are explicitly commanded, or that we do things that are explicitly commanded, but we need to make sure that we're not just condemning things just because they weren't explicitly commanded, if they were not explicitly forbidden. It's a delicate balancing act to find ourselves in, but I think when we treat one another with love, we treat one another with grace, and we are looking towards God's word for our pattern, we will find ourselves walking like the New Testament church walked. Thank you so much for your time. If you like our message here, feel free to like, share, to subscribe. We'd love to hear from you in the comments section. Until next time, we'll see you again.